This is Mental Health with Gregory Scott Brown, MD, a podcast devoted to exploring innovative ideas from unlikely advocates for mental wellness. Let us work together to reduce stigma, broaden access to care, and bridge gaps in understanding by refusing to shy away from difficult conversations. In this pursuit, we can promote natural and accessible wellness moving forward. Thank you for joining. Here is Gregory Scott Brown.
Named by Musical America as one of classical music's top 30 influencers for 2015, Alecia Lawyer is the founder, artistic director, and principal oboist for the Oaks Chamber Orchestra, a professional music ensemble comprised of musicians from the United States and around the world. ROCO has commissioned and world premiered over 75 works from living composers. Calling her business model Wildcatting in the Arts, Alecia was named a finalist for Texas Musician of the Year and was listed as one of Houston's top 50 most influential women. She regularly presents her entrepreneurial model and dynamic ideas to conservatories, universities, and music festivals including Yale, Southern Methodist University, Round Top, the Texas Music Festival, and the Juilliard School, using ROCO as a case study for community-specific orchestra building. After receiving her master's from Juilliard and bachelor's from SMU, Alecia's career has ranged from recording for John Cage to disc jockeying for KART's 92.1 FM in Houston, Texas. Enjoying a year residency in France, she recorded with the Sorbonne Orchestra, performed recitals in Paris, and concertized with various orchestras and chamber groups in France and Germany. ROCO recently released their first recording called Visions Take Flight, for which additional information is available on roco.org. I'm here in Houston, Texas, delighted to be joined by my teacher and very good mentor, Alecia Lawyer. Alecia, thank you so much for joining me.
You are welcome.
I can recall when the Oaks Chamber Orchestra was still a concept, when you were still in the initial stages of designing this amazing idea. Tell us a little bit about your inspiration behind ROCO.
Yeah. Well, I was in Houston non-musically for many years. I was a teacher, but I would say I'm not your teacher anymore. The student has become the master. But I would say that I'd been a part of many startups here, and as most people may not know, orchestral positions are lifetime jobs. So if you want one, you kind of have to be ready to move all the time. But I had a family here and a great life here, other than oboe, and was really ready to just explore other options. And my church, this great Frank Lloyd Wright style building, was renovating. And when I saw the drawings, I was like, oh, my stars, an orchestra could fit there. And then it was a big old talk from above saying, start an orchestra. And you don't usually say no to him. So I started thinking about the people that smile on stage, take great joy in what they do, are vulnerable on stage, invite the audience in. So that was the reason for the beginnings of the organization. And now we really call ourselves ROCO because so much of what we do is not orchestral. And out of 36 concerts, only 4 are in River Oaks. So we're all over the literal map and live streaming to the world and broadcast nationally, those kind of things. So it's really ROCO now, and it fits great on my license plate.
Well, I can test that sitting in a ROCO concert, even years ago, there's a sense of family, a sense of community that I think is different from most groups. Talk a little bit about what makes ROCO different from other orchestras.
I think it's relational and non-transactional. It's not about buying a ticket and witnessing something. It's about completing the circle of listening and engaging, because we aren't anything without an audience. When I had my first concert, I told this ridiculous joke. Unfortunately, the microphone was off, so no one heard me, and then I laughed by myself. It was hugely embarrassing, but as you probably know me well, that's typical of things that happen to me. But I said basically that I always wondered if an orchestra made a sound and there were no audience, would it make a sound? And that was not correct. I said, if an orchestra was to play and there were no audience, would it make a sound? And then I laughed and no one heard it. So anyway, but it's true. It is a completion of a circle. And I think that's what makes ROCO unique, is this relational aspect of wanting to have a relationship with everyone there. And musicians wanting to do that, an audience wanting to do that. It's kind of like the old Cheers, everyone knows your name. And it matters. That's why house lights are up. So when you're there, there's this shared space that's there. And that timings of pieces are written in so you know how long a piece is. Ways of pronouncing composers' names are in there because you may not know how to say Mozart. A lot of people don't. They say Mozart, and that's okay. And then we started realizing that we were playing a lot of dead white men composers, and there were so many people, such diversity here in Houston in general, and so many people writing that had such unique voices, and we started commissioning. And now we're the third largest commissioner in the United States. We've done almost 80 world premieres. So that kind of interactive, you can be with a composer and interact with them is a huge part. We also have childcare music education during and after concerts, so familial, multi-generational audiences. But we're also the only orchestra that provides childcare during rehearsals for musicians. So it's a true embrace of family. And I guess the word is invitational. It's not presentational.
Right, and I can attest to that. It's truly remarkable, both on stage and off stage, the experience that ROCO provides. Leading along those lines, many of the people who hear this podcast are not musicians. Yes. What's it like sitting on stage?
Well, we actually invite 4 audience members to do so each concert. And I think when you're surrounded by and enveloped by the sound, there are chills that you got for first experiences that you've always had, whether it's your first roller coaster or your first date or your first anything. And I think when that happens, there's something visceral about it. And that's important for people to realize that it's actually a really physical sport to perform in an orchestra. And I don't think people realize that. And my favorite thing to do is do salons with people so close to me that they see how much we snort and sweat and look horrible while we play the oboe. And I'm vain enough to have not picked it if I'd known what I was going to look like. But I love the fact that they don't realize what goes into it to make it seem effortless. And I think that's the point. And this whole relationship idea, we do that take 5 where the musicians go into the audience during the break to, again, welcome and greet and meet. And everyone has a seat at the table.
And regardless of what you say, you're one of my most cherished and admired mentors, even today. And both of us attended the Juilliard School. Right. You essentially guided me to the Juilliard School.
I tell it differently. Okay. I warned you.
But both of us have experienced both the joys and hardship and dedication and sweat and tears that come along with that opportunity. Share a little bit about the process of becoming a professional classical musician.
Well, there are many pathways now, which is a big part of what I do, is talk about entrepreneurialism in the arts and all the other choices. Since orchestras are folding, Baltimore just had a problem this past week, and just trying to figure out how this model is going to fly into the future. And I don't know that it will, the big orchestra models. So that's what's exciting to me, are all the entrepreneurial things popping up. And so there isn't, to me, one pathway. When you and or I was ahead of you, but when we were there, the one pathway is you win a job, that's what you do. And maybe 2 openings happen a year, but think how many thousands of oboists are graduating. And so it really is more about your life and how your choices are, like, where do you want to live? What do you want to be? And I think there's a great podcast blog place called Crushing Classical, and she talks a lot about how you get into your 40s and you realize, wow, I'm pretty miserable. And you no matter what, you have a job or you don't have a job, it doesn't matter. And so I think if we can start, and this, I think, dives straight into your idea of green psychiatry and all the wellness. If we can be a human first, then I think we can be better musicians. The whole field would change.
There was an article that came out in the New York Times back in 2004. I remember reading this, and they essentially looked at 44 instrumentalists who had graduated from Juilliard in 1994, right, the Juilliard effect. And they found that only about 11 of these musicians had obtained jobs in professional orchestras 10 years later. Right. And they addressed substance use disorders as a predominant concern. And most people don't think about those things when they think about, the work of a classical musician. Why do you think that substance use and mental health issues are pressing concerns in the world of classical music?
Because I think the judges are always there, and I think that they're false or true, but those don't go away until you find a different path, even if you win. And I think you're encouraged to actually do drugs, because there's a lot of the beta blockers that are encouraged if you have fear on stage. And I never used those because I actually really liked feeling frightened. There's almost a sense of I'm alive. Yeah. Of course, I'm a huge adrenaline junkie, and so I like roller coasters and things like that. I keep mentioning. But I do think that there's depression that's underlying all of that, which all comes down to self-worth and shame, and instead of who you are intrinsically, internally. And then again, there's this invitation. I could not have done ROCO if I hadn't had it in my own church, where a place I felt safe. that I could be vulnerable and invite other people into this experience of, you are not judged here. Yes, you have to be good. There is a level of understanding of quality, but that's very different than I'm waiting for you to mess up.
Right.
And that's what I feel like the whole field is. It's like waiting for you to mess up so when you get out of the orchestra, I can audition for your job. Yeah. Or when you pass away, or something like that. Instead of, how do we learn from each other? And this is the only field I know that does not have professional development in the future parts of its field.
Right.
As a matter of fact, you stop playing for people when you get out in the world because you're afraid that you're a failure and you're afraid you're a fraud. Right. And so that stuff doesn't go away and takes a lot of healing. And I do feel like ROCO has been healing for me and a lot of people to invite them into that space.
Talk a little bit more about that.
Well, at the first set of every rehearsal, I stand up and I say, this is your safe place. This is your happy place. This is a place I want you to take risks to discover the unique parts of who you are musically. And I think that kind of an invitation, and the musicians are even starting to talk about it being ROCO moments, things that happen like that. And one of our flutist came down from an orchestra that she plays in and for the first time, and she said that she always put her bubble up around her when she started playing. She said she always felt me leaning over and going pop, and then she'd put it back up, and then it would pop, and then she finally was like, I get it, okay, I can let go, I can be myself. And now I'm not the one that gives the lectures. Musicians in the orchestra ask to give the little talk at the beginning of the week to say, hey guys, this is a place. And I think there are a lot more barriers that can be broken down for the big orchestra model, because that's way beyond the layers that can be broken at this point. Right. But it could hopefully be a model for future things. There's
studies that show that there's a role for music when it comes to, especially classical music, when it comes to learning and memory. And, despite these things, music is something that is therapeutic, and it's also a lot of fun. Yeah. Do you consider that, I can recall of playing the Haydn concerto at Rice University, and an elderly woman after the concert came up to me and she held my hands and she was in tears. And at the time, I was just a kid. I didn't really, appreciate that moment. But I've thought about that several times since then. My interpretation of that piece really touched her. Do you ever consider that your role in ROCO, there could be a man or woman out in the audience who's struggling with depression or anxiety, or a teenage girl, for example, who's struggling with suicidal thoughts, and your craft, that music, resonates with them. And in many ways, it could be, literally in many ways, it could be healing. Do you ever consider, it's powerful to think about that.
I do all the time. And it's interesting, though, you said your interpretation of the piece. I would challenge and go further and say, I think it's just that you speak soul to soul with people. And we talked about that a lot in our times together, of just getting past your instrument to say what you want to say. And I think that's true with any field. If you can get past the mechanics and the machinations of the field you're in, you can speak to people soul to soul. And that's life's work. And I think that's what's special about what you're doing as well. And you're inviting people into their true self, and not in a loosey-goosey weird way, but in a way that's authentic. And I think that's the word I use all the time. ROCO is authentic. It's authentic relationships. And every time I do a speech, I talk to people and I say, look, at the next really bad gig you're in, next time you're just miserable, it's a bad music, blah, blah, blah. Look into the audience, find that little lady. I always say it's a little lady, but it could be a little guy. I don't care. And I mean older person, because you need to feel gratitude. That's the only thing that you can really live your life by. So when you go see them, go up after an intermission or afterward, and you say, thank you for having me here. Sure. It will change your life.
And last month I sat down with Heather Alden. And so she is a remarkable woman. She's the executive director of an organization in Austin called the Sims Foundation, which provides substance abuse and mental health services for local Austin musicians. How do you feel about this idea?
Well, I think it's just not talked about in our field. So I think it's kind of, maverick of her and fantastic, because we just don't talk about it. As a matter of fact, it usually means there's something wrong, as opposed to meaning it's a natural process of the life we're living.
And I know that there's some work in Houston as far as the Center for Performance Arts Medicine.
A lot of that is more like trying to connect, the Houston Symphony to Methodist, and trying to have that, which is great. I think the dialogue has to be there. There's always somebody, like I know a hand surgeon. That's always nice to know. And especially one of our violists had a horrible bicycle accident, and she had really great recovery because of that. And so, and another one had a car accident, violinist, with her neck. And so just those things that are physical, but I think that's okay to talk about sometimes, but the mental things are really hard. And that's where, again, it's in partnership with people. I don't love doing concertos because I feel like, not just that I'm alone, but even though I know I have a lot to say, I have a lot to say, and that's a kind of a joke, but I just feel like it's not in partnership.
Now, I've always appreciated Houston as a dynamic city for the arts. In what ways is ROCO making chamber music more accessible for the city of Houston?
Well, we have a lot of free concerts, and and our tickets are inexpensive, but we're in the city. We have 16 different venues we play in, and we do things like In Concert, which is all 40 players. Half of them don't live here. They fly in to play. Those are live streamed for free and broadcast nationally, and all our music's available on our website at roco.org for free listening. It's great, but this other series called Connections is site-specific or artist-specific partnerships, like Day of the Dead at Mecca, or Peter and the Wolf, which is now Peter and the Bear at the zoo because they have a new bear exhibit, and they don't have the wolves there anymore. So, and Vintage Game Night at Rienzi, but the idea that you're really intrinsically tying it to the community. I mean, it would be great if ROCO could be the first professional community orchestra.
Now, you'll hear me, as you mentioned earlier, you'll hear me advocate frequently for this idea of green psychiatry, which is essentially an initiative that supports a comprehensive approach to mental wellness, which means that we would acknowledge things like the role of music in someone's overall mental state. How do you feel about this idea overall?
There's nothing better than to find the true reason someone is in the state they're in, and the idea of layering medications on top of medications and having symptoms actually be from medications, to me, is just chronic. I've seen it in my grandmother, my father-in-law. I mean, I've seen it happen so many times, and just trying to get to the bottom of who a human is first, again, be a human first, is probably the best thing that could ever happen, because I find that a lot of psychology just tries to find what's wrong as opposed to connecting the rights.
I think that's very well said. I completely agree. What are some of the other things that ROCO is doing in the community? Well,
again, the music education childcare for kids is something really unique, and just really creating new music and always being kind of a fountain of creation, having collaborative ideas, and frankly, just never ending, because what you're doing is pouring into your musicians and releasing them into their own creativity. There's no end to that. It will never end, because that's possible. It's not somebody from on high dictating. It's also not one conductor who's got their ego on the podium. It's really collaborative artists who come in and just try to connect and weave our music through Houston.
People who are familiar with the world of music told me, once you've been through music, medicine will be a walk in the park. Right. Easy. It wasn't easy, but I will definitely say that the skills I learned from music are things that I carry with me every single day, from the type of dedication and confidence. I think music gave me so much more confidence than I would have had otherwise. And then that passion for music is something that I still have, even so many years later. Talk about how you feel about this role of music from a very young age, classical music, and the life's lessons that craft can teach.
Like you said, the discipline of it, and there are parts of your life that you have to learn math facts. You have to do certain things to get proficient at a certain level. I mean, I had the luxury of 2 years after Juilliard of taking hours on end, not just with scales, but playing excerpts super slow and just really delving into it. And that was a true gift, because then after that, you're ready to roll. But as far as music goes, it's one of the few things when you're reading and performing music at the same time that lights your entire brain up. We can weave it physically through our community. We can also weave it through our own brain. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure and certain that this is the path of the future for medicine.
And finally, Alecia, what are you up to these days?
Well, ROCO pretty much takes up 24/7, 28/8 of my life. Just the idea that this can become we don't need a ROCO in every city, but what you can have is something that is community specific, built on the principles of what ROCO is doing, and really just finding the unique things of each city. And I'm trying to get this national to talk about entrepreneurialism in the arts, and just speaking to colleges, universities at that level, especially the ones who don't want to hear it. you and I probably would have been one of those at Juilliard that wouldn't want to hear this, because you'd be like, whatever, I'm getting a job. And those are the people that need to hear it, because even if you get the job, you're in the job, what is the next step? How do you grow? What do you do from there? So that's really turning into my next realm of wanting to share the story, wanting to help coach people into their next wave of how to economically create a viable community organization.
Those are all incredible ideas, and I wish you the very best. Well, thank you for an enlightening conversation, and more importantly, thank you for your friendship and mentorship. I enjoyed speaking with you today. Thank you so much.
You bet. Thanks.
Quoting the Greek philosopher Plato, music gives wings to the mind. Yet historically, classical music is riddled with stories of depression, from Tchaikovsky to Rachmaninoff to Berlioz, who I might add also studied medicine. At the same time, music offers hope to so many who are struggling to break free from the gridlock that depression affords. At the intersection of classical music and medicine is an art that offers transformation, growth, and healing. To Alecia Lawyer and to the River Oaks Chamber Orchestra, thank you. And to the listeners, thank you for joining. Stay well.
This discussion is not intended to replace professional medical advice, and views of guests are their own. If you're struggling with suicidal thoughts, get help immediately or call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. Gregory Scott Brown, MD, is a resident in general psychiatry at the Dell Medical School, a fellow with the Academy of Integrative Health and Medicine, and author of the blog Green Psychiatry in Psychology Today. Follow him on Facebook or Twitter at Gregory S. Brown, MD, or visit his website at gregoryscottbrown.com.